Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. The Historic District Commission is going to have a quick meeting, take care of some regular meeting business. Should take more than a few minutes, and then we'll get started with the presentation.
Thank you for that. Yeah. Welcome, everybody. Roll call tonight. We have regular members, myself and Alan and Paul and Tom. And Jessica has called. The regular business item, the minutes from the meeting of September 23rd. Voting on those minutes with the Alan, Paul, and only. So if you guys want to make any suggested changes, amendments, motion to approve, all in approval. Second. All in favor of the three of you? Right. Okay, thank you. That's done. Any correspondence, Krista?
No, I do not have any.
Nope.
Okay, the committee reports, staff reports. There none. 2026 meeting calendar. We have that in the material. Continuing the third Tuesday of every month at 6 o'clock. 6 p.m. Anybody have any objections to that? Okay. Agree unanimously that that's going to be meeting. Yes. Okay. Thank you. All right. On that, we can get right into the workshop.
All right, let's get started. The meeting is done. Business is done, so we're ready to go.
You can close the meeting.
Oh, I don't think it's over until
Meeting's closed.
yeah, you can adjourn after, I think. Stacy, Mary, can you hear us?
Oh, yeah, okay,
Hi.
okay.
You all set? All set to go?
All right, we're ready. Okay, I guess I'll start. So thanks for asking us to be there. I'm sorry for various reasons, the two of us could not make it in person. So I'm glad you were able to set up a video option. I'm Mary Dunn. I work for the State Historic Preservation Office, which is part of the Department of Economic and Community Development. I'll let Stacy introduce herself in a minute. And we're just here tonight to talk about, mainly in the context of homes, the Secretary of the Interior standards, and we'll talk a little bit about different treatments for your home and materials that you should or maybe shouldn't use, and some financial incentives. Are there many members of the public here, or is it mostly the HDC? Because we can tailor it accordingly.
We have about 15 members of the public.
Great. Okay, good.
Couple on Zoom.
All righty. So I guess, Stacy, you can introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Stacy Vero. I'm a circuit rider, which means I'm a field service officer, technician with Preservation Connecticut. We're the statewide nonprofit. I'm also the education manager now. Preservation Connecticut is, as I said, a statewide nonprofit. We partner with the State Historic Preservation Office and have been doing so for many, many years now. So I'm going to turn it back over to Mary so she can start. And sorry we can't be there. I unfortunately totaled my car last week, or else I would have been there. So sorry.
Okay, slide. Oops. So, as I said, and I think we're here tonight to kind of chat with homeowners and the commission about, appropriate work on your residences, but we kind of want to just put it in the context of where we're coming from. As Stacy said, she's with Preservation Connecticut, and I'm with the State Historic Preservation Office. So the way we look at work and offer incentives is definitely in the context of historic preservation. So we just kind of wanted to say what is historic preservation? And at its basic, it's the identification of places and sites and structures and buildings that have historic or architectural significance, either to a locality or the state or the nation. And then as those resources are identified, we want to put in place measures to protect them, and to make them more useful for the public through developing them, hopefully appropriately. As I said, our office is housed in the Department of Economic and Community Development because historic preservation can really play a major role in the economic vitality of a town. And it can offer certain tangible benefits to the property owner. Historic preservation is also sustainability. We're very we want to make sure that people understand that we are part of protecting natural resources as well as historic resources, mainly through keeping buildings rather than demolishing them and replacing them with new materials that will probably not last nearly as long as the original buildings did. And then also, as part of the identification process, historic preservation offers an opportunity to discover and tell the stories of communities and people that we don't yet know about. We don't want to run the risk of demolishing properties that might be tied to important history or important architectural movements. So that's why the identification is really the first step, followed by protection. Sorry if you can hear my dog in the background, but next slide, please. So the formalization of historic preservation began with the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966. That is the act that set up state historic preservation offices around the country, created the National Register of Historic Places, and basically established provisions for the identification and protection of historic resources. And then ever since 1966, the act has been amended to include financial incentives like the tax credit program, and various other aspects of historic preservation. And Stacy, if you want to jump in at any time, that is fine with me because I might be a little cursory here. But basically on the national level, people, we say that the act actually protects you from the government. It doesn't impose government law on you. And an example would be that if the federal government wants to build a highway through your town green, which may be a very important resource to you, our office, or Section 106 of the Act, provides for taking a step back, examining the project, and deciding whether that project's going to have a negative impact or an adverse impact on your local historic resources. So the act kind of serves to give you a mechanism for protecting the places and sites that are important to you.
And it was really the start of identifying, assessing, recording, and then therefore protecting historic resources in the context of planning within the United States. So that happened at a very early date. When you think about the EPA versus historic resources, this predates that. And so when you think of environmental laws, preservation really was one of the first environmental laws to be passed. So.
Right. And Stacy makes a good point that the impetus for the 1966 Act was the fact that so many historic neighborhoods were being destroyed as a result of the federal highway system going through. It was becoming so prevalent and kind of dire that the reaction was sort of, wait a minute, we don't want to lose anything more until we kind of take a look at how we can put protections in place. And also, it kind of took focus away from, George Washington slept here, to what's important to your town, what is important to you, not just, association with commonly known, historic figures and landmarks. Okay, so the National Park Service is our federal partner in historic preservation, and the Secretary of the Interior established guidelines for how you should or maybe shouldn't treat your historic resources. And so they're the Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. And there are various standard treatments ranging from preservation, which is a program of as little intervention as possible, maintaining as much of the historic fabric and configuration of a property as possible, and any changes that have to occur should be minimal, and material should be in kind. And then we focus more on the standards for rehabilitation, which allow for a new use for an historic property. Say you have a vacant schoolhouse. You don't want to demolish it, but you really don't have a need for a school anymore. So the rehab standards provide for converting that property to a new use, and putting it back on the tax rolls. And so they're a little more flexible than preservation, and they provide for economic development. Anything else, Stacy? I mean,
There are two other standards
Yeah.
for restoration and reconstruction, but those are again used for specific circumstances when maybe a portion of a building is missing or a feature of a building is missing, the restoration standard is used to recreate that. And then reconstruction is a wholesale reconstruction of again a large feature or an entire building based on very substantiated evidence. So it can't just be a guess. It has to be substantiated with photos or plans or something of the like. But preservation, as Mary said, is really reserved for maybe a museum setting. Rehabilitation is what you as the HDC members use as maybe your guidelines, and what we would recommend for any of the programs that we evaluate.
so the standards for rehabilitation, again, they're not really do's and don'ts. They're not law. They're standards. They're recommended practices. And you probably are familiar with them. The historic character of a building should be retained and preserved. And when you're reusing a building or putting it into a different use, that means you still want to kind of retain the look and the feeling. If you're converting a firehouse to a restaurant, you might not want to get rid of the pole, the fire pole, or a spiral staircase that might be going up, from the ground floor up to the firemen's quarters. You might not want to get rid of the door that retracts into the building. You keep some features that make it read as a firehouse, but you can put a bar in there, for the restaurant. So there's a little give and take. And while you're converting something to a new use, you want to retain as many distinctive features and construction techniques as possible. Any milled wood or plaster ceilings, things like that. You want to repair things rather than replace them with new materials. If something is severely deteriorated, you want to replace the material in kind. Although Stacy's going to talk a little bit later about various other options for that. We talked a little, Stacy mentioned the reconstruction or the restoration standards. You don't want to create a false sense of historical development. So if you take that fire station and convert it to a restaurant, and you want to put a rooftop, dining area, you might want to hide it behind the parapet or something. You just want to not just add things to a building that never would have been there. And you also don't want to mimic the original building to the point where it looks like it was always there. So there's kind of give and take with the standards. And they, frankly, they take experience with review to kind of over the years to kind of come to a good understanding of how the standards should be applied. I guess next slide. Again, I guess we talked about this. Deteriorated features should be repaired rather than replaced. There is No, there's not. Yes, there is. There is the Secretary of the Interior does address substitute materials. We don't want to say all substitute materials are bad or any, brand names are bad, but since so much has been untested, we either recommend using substitute materials on a limited basis or waiting until we see how the material performs over time. And we especially don't want to sacrifice any of the historic fabric of a building during the use of implementing a new material. So that again needs to be examined in the context of the building's history and its architectural features. And so, yes, Preservation Brief 16, and we'll talk a little bit about the preservation briefs later, does address substitute materials on historic exteriors. And as I said earlier, the standards are added and evolve over time. And there's actually a whole set on sustainability. And that one is of particular use to the commission because it does address things like solar panels, replacement windows, and kind of provides guidance on how to review projects that include these types of things and what to consider if you're going to approve or deny a certificate of appropriateness. But of course, the basic foundation of sustainability and preservation is the greenest building is the one that's already built because the amount of energy it would take to demolish that building, put it in a landfill, extract natural resources, or produce unnatural resources, synthetic resources, transport them to the building site. All of the energy that's used to do that exceeds the energy savings that you would expect, by putting that new building into use. So it's really, really best to keep the building that's been standing for over 100 years, before you start thinking about demolishing and replacing.
And we call that energy embodied energy. And so when we talk about the materials, which I'm going to talk about next, all of those materials have embodied energy too. So when you're talking about a historic building, retaining as much of that embodied energy in the structure itself and in the labor and in the movement to the structure and, the delivery and the processing and all of that is what makes up the energy, that embodied energy in the building that can actually be calculated out. So another thing, Mary, I don't know, I don't want to jump in and cut you off, but there is a guidebook that the SHPO has for homeowners, specifically for historic houses, and it gives a tremendous amount of guidance relative to all sorts of subject areas, and you can get it on the SHPO website. So there's a copy that you see here, but it is available on the SHPO website. So I'm going to jump in and talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of replacing material. And I think Mary discussed the idea of character defining features, when she started talking about the standards. And character defining features are anything that really speak to the style or the date or the type of building, things that make you read a building a certain way. And those typically, when you're talking about a house in New England, are made of wood or brick or masonry, but typically wood. So as you can see on the right-hand side, there is two examples of the same species of wood. I don't know the species. Maybe someone there does, but grown 100 years apart from one another. And you can see how dense the old growth wood is. And that old growth wood is not only denser, but it prevents rot, it prevents insect damage. It is infinitely reparable. So you can sand it, you can repair it, you can paint it, and it will remain, for the most part, if maintained, for many, many years. So that's something to always consider as to why maybe original materials are superior to something you could buy today. So even if you're replacing in kind. So some things to consider are the condition of the existing materials. Can those existing materials be repaired or replaced in kind? And are they even still available? So that's number one, basic. Can the design of the replacement materials replicate what you have? So does the proposed replacement match the original in not only the appearance, but the profile, the color, the texture, the absorption factor? So when you paint it, is it going to look the same as what has been there already? So as an HDC member, or maybe as an applicant, when you're working with a contractor, it's not unreasonable to ask them to not only provide design drawings, but specifications, samples, anything that you think can help the commission make a decision, or you as a homeowner make a decision as to whether this really is going to work for your historic house. And it's reasonable also to ask how long that material has been in use. As Mary mentioned, we don't know how long a lot of these materials are going to perform for. They might seem wonderful right now, but we don't know how they're going to look in 10 years. And we've come across quite a few examples of big projects that have used unnamed, I'm not going to name a specific type, but replacement materials, and they have failed, and you have to replace them like wholesale. You can't sand them down and fix them. They have to be completely replaced. Another consideration is whether the installation of that replacement material is going to be performed by an experienced fabricator or installer. So it makes all the difference. As you can see on the right-hand side, that texture, you need to know if your fabricator is going to give you the right sample and give you the right material so that you know how it's going to look and you know how it's going to be placed on the building. So that's all very important information. And then how do the original and the replacement materials work together? Will that new material compromise the performance of original materials that are already in place? And most importantly of all, is the work reversible? Reversibility is number one. If you can reverse something, generally it's not allowable, but I'm not saying any replacement material is simply allowable, but reversibility is always key. And it's something to keep in mind when you're dealing with solar panels, windows, any feature that you're working with. So one of the things Mary and I come across the most are replacement window requests. And we're going to come at this from a preservation point of view, as Mary said at the beginning. So think about it this way. We're the kind of the opposite of your typical window salesman. So we're gonna give you the opposing viewpoint. But this is backed up by fact that only 10% of a typical home's heat loss happens through the windows. Most of it happens through the roof because heat rises, it goes up, it goes through the chimney, it goes through the attic. So really, the total heat loss in a home is pretty minimal when it comes to the windows. Now, it might not feel that way. I'm sitting next to a very drafty old window myself, but it's still not going to be as much as what the rest of my house is losing. So they're not as inefficient as you might think, old windows. So a lot of studies have also showed that a rehabilitated, that means a window with new glazing, with new weather stripping, that has been properly glazed and puttied and painted, combined with a new storm, can perform as well as or even better than a replacement. And we are currently working on a project with the SHPO to prove this. We're working on something to actually create a case study on this. So hopefully that will be ready by the next time we talk to you. But something else to keep in mind is that replacement windows only have between a 10 and 20 year warranty. So when people are saying it's a lifetime warranty, it's often not even 10 years that they do last, these new windows. And windows that were made a century ago can, and we see it all the time, and do continue to perform with proper maintenance. So when you're considering replacement windows, several options are available. You can have wood replacements, you can have aluminum clad wood replacements, you can have vinyl replacements. All of these are the least best case scenario, right? So these are sort of like the last resort. If your window's completely gone, it's completely beyond repair. What do you replace it with, right? So the considerations here are, of course, the size. When you have a historic house, as most of you know, the size of your openings of the windows are not going to be consistent, and they're not going to match anything that comes off the line typically. So it's going to have to be a custom window. You need to match the glazing pattern. You need to know that it's going to have true divided lights and a Muntin profile that matches what's already there. And you need to match, in many cases, if possible, the glass characteristics. These are all, kind of tall orders, and all speak to the idea of why keeping your historic windows intact and well-maintained really are always the best option. So here is one resource. Window Preservation Alliance is a wonderful resource. It's filled with information. They have a restorer directory. They have a mentor program where they could teach you how to repair your windows. And I'm going to give a little plug. Next Wednesday, we're going to be doing a Talking About Preservation, which is a free noontime chat, and we're going to have a window restorer giving some basic tips on how to restore your wood windows. So you can look at Preservation Connecticut's website for that information. But another really wonderful resource is Scott Sidler's book that just came out. He writes the Craftsman blog, and he is a wonderful guide for how to restore your windows. So getting into siding, I'm going to use my house as an example again. I have a 1930s house with shingles, shingle siding. This is not my house, but my house was sandblasted or power washed at one point, and there are deep grooves in the shingles. And just last week, I had someone come out and say, don't worry about it. If you really give it a good, solid paint job, that should level out for the most part, and it should be fine moving forward. So do you really need to replace a somewhat worn looking or somewhat battered looking house? You need to have someone come out and actually take a look, even someone who talks about this for a living. You need to have someone come out who really knows what they're doing and give it a look and see whether you really need to replace, or if you can just repair what's there, or partially repair what's there, and then give it a good paint and go on your way. But there are substitute materials. There's, of course, vinyl, fiber cement siding, and new wood. And as we just showed, new wood is not always the best option, but it is better than those other alternatives. It's more highly recommended. So the reason why cementitious siding is not recommended is because it is still made partially of wood. So it's a combination of wood and pulp and ash and cement. And it does come in a number of sizes and shapes and finishes, but it is typically not as easy to maintain as it is purported to be. It still needs to be painted or stained regularly, and it can really absorb moisture in a way that wood doesn't. You can see from that top picture, it can form some really nasty gaps and not perform the way you'd like it to. And you can't fix it in the same way you could wood. You can't just sand it down and fix it. So when we're talking about porches, and I should back up and say all of these examples of different types of materials were taken from the National Trust's website. And there was a study done of several different cities and different historic district commissions in those cities across the country. And they talked about what was typically approved and what wasn't approved for historic district commissions. So that's where these recommendations are coming out of. But for porches and trims and brackets, PVC or polyvinyl chloride elements are typically not recommended. They split and they crack and they yellow, and often that texture is way too smooth, and it just reads really poorly even from a distance. And you can tell that it is not, it doesn't match sister elements if they're together on a porch. But they do tend to last a long time. They just don't look very good after after a while. And then, so for these finer elements, again, maintenance is always key. Maintaining what you have in place is always the best option, because to try and replace these features, these are often hand carved or even machine carved, but the machines that carved them are no longer in operation. So to get composite or manufactured columns, they're not going to be the same in many cases. And as I said before, PVC is not the best option. It doesn't hold paint the same way. It doesn't perform the same way. It doesn't look the same. It may initially, and you could say, well, I've seen several examples where it looks great. Now it does. I just don't think that it will in the future. And again, stippling is another issue where they form like little divots in the PVC, and then that holds mildew or moisture or mold, and it tends to discolor that way too. So roofs, this is a little bit of a tricky one, because some people consider roofs to be character defining features. Other people tend to treat roofs more as a reversible element. And in a simple colonial house, like you see above on the above image, the roof itself is a character defining element, because there really isn't much else going on with the house. So a cedar roof, we would recommend cedar replacement for that. We understand that cedar is very expensive, but if possible, replacing it partially, or seeing if you could source the cedar from other. We can work with you if you contact Preservation Connecticut. We've come up with some sources in Canada that tend to be a little bit more reasonable for cedar shakes. And then there's terracotta. Not many people are going to have terracotta roofs, but I just met a terracotta manufacturer yesterday at another meeting, and it's still happening. There are quite a few shops still in Connecticut even. So I think that's something that you can find. But the Park Service and the SHPO, if you must replace a roof, they would recommend asphalt shingles. So terracotta obviously wouldn't fit on a colonial house, but asphalt shingles would. They could be a reasonable replacement. And if you're in a historic district, I think we've come across many instances, Mary, you can jump in here, of roof replacements where we've said, or we've recommended to commissioners that it is okay to allow asphalt shingle roofs.
Yeah, and asphalt shingle roofs have been around for a long, long time. So we know what they do, what they look like after a while, their longevity. And so it wouldn't be unusual for someone to maybe have replaced their roof 50 years ago, their original roof with asphalt shingles. So it makes continuity. It makes sense. Whereas, and Stacy's going to mention this, that a standing seam metal roof, which they seem very popular,
Very
but
popular.
but if they never existed, ever, in a particular region or area, it's just not an accurate material to use.
And we are seeing a ton of these now. I was just driving through Litchfield County yesterday, and I saw a really high number of them. I was surprised. But they didn't exist in New England, typically, in our part, in Southern New England, right? So they didn't typically exist in Southern New England. And they're very popular in the South. but they're not something that would have historically been found on a roof in Connecticut. So we don't recommend standing seam metal roofs. There are some instances of like a pressed tin roof. Yeah, I live in Woodbury, and in my town we do have some of those, but it's very rare and it's very specific to a specific time period too. So again, standing seam metal would not be appropriate. So not a lot of you are going to have this, but there are slate and alternative slate roofs, and I think there has been some approval of these composite slate tiles on churches, you know, when they're very high up. But again, slate roofs can be repaired, partially repaired. I know because I also had a house with a slate roof at one point, and we repaired it on a very tight budget. So it's possible. And the slates do last a tremendously long time. If you get the right installer, if you get the right person to do the work, if you get the right material, it can last for a tremendously long time at not a tremendously high cost. So there are alternatives, and there are 2 examples below. You can see that they look pretty good, but again, we don't know how these are going to look in 10 or 20 years. We just don't. So something to keep in mind. So doors, you can see this beautiful surround on the right here is infilled with a very modern looking door. And doors might seem like something that is not very important, but they are, again, on primary elevations, they can be character defining. And the most important thing is not necessarily to match the material, but to match the pattern. So if it was a 4-panel door or a 6-panel door, to match that pattern for the appearance. Because if you're going down a street and you see a street full of doors that look like this, it's not going to read as a street filled with colonial houses. So it's that cumulative impact of change that we have to keep in mind too. And the same thing goes for garage doors. Again, the material is not as important as long as it matches the original design. But if possible, wooden doors are always the best option. So what do you use? If we're telling you not to use all these things, what can you use? And it's kind of exciting that there is a new set of products on the market. And we're just sort of learning about them in the past few years. But modified wood is coming into popular use. And there are 3 types that I found that are most prevalent. The first is acetylated wood, which is they use a real fast growing pine, and they soak it in this runoff that is like a vinegar, and it's actually part of a brewing process. So it's runoff from brewing, and they soak the wood, and it completely impregnates the wood, and it resists all moisture and insects. It can be sanded, it can be painted, and it just swells to create this hard wood. And the fact that that exists and it is natural, it's non-toxic. It's not like a typical just coated wood that we used to, build horse fences with that was very highly toxic. That is, it's a completely different type of process. So it also remains dimensionally stable. So it's not going to sort of warp or change its appearance. So it'll be resistant to those cycles of thawing and swelling and sort of contracting. That's the word I'm looking for. But there are 2 other types. There's a bio-based liquid soaked wood, which is known as Kebony. The acetylated wood is Akoya. That's the brand name. We can talk about the brand names we recommend because that's different than the ones we don't. So Akoya is the brand name of acetylated wood. Kebony is a bio-based liquid soaked wood. And there's also a thermally altered wood, which is basically steamed to create the same type of result. And that's called Termery or Luna wood. And those are pretty readily available now. They might be a little bit more expensive, but I think in what you get out of it, they're good products. And then this is the collection of briefs that are available. So when we're talking about all these different types of materials and applications, there is guidance for nearly everything. The Park Service has 51 preservation briefs currently, and they range from everything from roofing to substitute materials that Mary mentioned before, porches, masonry, appropriate cleaning methods, and they're all available online still at the Park Service website. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Mary.
Great. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a financial incentive that's available to private homeowners, and all of the information that Stacy just gave you is sort of leading up to hopefully providing tools for you as the homeowner, or you as a historic district commissioner, as a homeowner, to be able to talk to your contractors, to maybe push back, if they're pushing the replacement windows, but you can see that you don't need new windows, just so that you can kind of, get the language. And then as commissioners, you can just point to the standards or the briefs to provide information to your property owners, but also to help you as you deliberate certificates of appropriateness. But an actual financial incentive that's available to private homeowners is the Historic Homes Tax Credit program. It's been around since 2000, so 25 years. And it is a tax credit equal to 30% of qualified rehabilitation expenses, up to $30,000. So if you have to spend $100,000 on your house, replacing the roof, restoring the windows, it also includes interior work, upgrading your plumbing and electricity, you can get 30% of that $100,000 back in the form of a tax credit, which can either be taken on your state income tax return or exchanged for cash to another qualified buyer. And actually, Eversource has been a very supportive of this program for the last 15 or 20 years. And they actually will purchase the tax credit dollar for dollar and then use it on their taxes. You do have to spend at least $15,000. It used to be 25,000. We got the legislation changed to 15. We'd like to see it go a little lower because we'd like to make it, available to as many people as possible. Except that these days, material and labor is so expensive that it may not be difficult to spend 15,000 on your house. In any case, that is a program that that our office administers, and Aaron Fink, who runs the program, would be happy to do a workshop specifically on that credit. And I would also be happy to answer any questions after this. To be eligible for the program, you need to be your house needs to be formally designated on the state or national register. So Stacy, I guess next slide. And this is an opportunity to let people know that there is a difference. You have the National Historic Landmarks, but we don't really, I don't think there's any private owners of National Historic Landmarks anymore, but the National Register of Historic Places is kept by the National Park Service. It is the list of properties that are important historically or architecturally to the story of our nation. In Connecticut, if a property is listed on the National Register and someone wants to demolish it, any citizen has standing to try to sue to prevent the unreasonable destruction of a property listed on the National Register. Other than that, though, it's really just an honor. You can do whatever you want with your house if it's listed on the National Register, only on the National Register. You can paint it any color you want. You can, add to it. You can make any changes you want. So there are no restrictions associated. Then there's the state register, which is kept by our office, and those are properties that specifically are important to the history or the architectural history of the state of Connecticut. This is the least fettered designation. There's really no restrictions. The Environmental Protection Act does not apply to state register properties. It's basically honor and recognition, but it is the threshold for getting financial incentives. If you're a nonprofit or a municipality, you can get grants from our office for a property that's listed on the state register. And if you're a private homeowner, you can apply for the Historic Homes Tax Credit Program if your house is listed on the state register. It does not have to be in the national register. And then, of course, as you all know, the local historic district is the one that's created by a local ordinance in your town. And that is part of a, preservation plan that does provide for regulation or review of changes to architectural features that are visible from a public way, exterior. Up until 2019, anything in a local district was automatically listed on the state register. So I'm pretty sure your local districts are also state registered. They may even be national, because a lot of national register districts kind of select areas to become locally designated. Next slide. So as I said, the state register is an honorary designation. You do have to fill out or prepare a nomination form, which you can either do on your own or hire someone to do for you. Unlike the National Register, which prefers to start looking at properties that are 50 years old or older before they are considered for listing, with exceptions, there is no age restriction on state register properties. And as I said, the Protection Act does not apply. That program is managed by Marina Wisniewski in our office. So if you're interested in getting your house on the state register, you can contact her to get that process started. And as I said, the local historic districts and properties are purely a municipal action. Our office does review the study report that creates a district or a property. But after that, as you know, a district requires a 2/3 majority vote of the property owners that are voting in order to be considered. But then your local legislative body actually has the final say. I've seen districts that had a 95% voting in favor, and then for some reason, the local legislative body does not put it in place. So it's definitely a local municipal action, and then it results in an ordinance that provides guidance to the Historic District Commission on how to review work that's visible from a public way. Yeah. So if you don't know if your property is listed, you can either call our office or you can go to this website, Congress, which has pretty much every property in our paper files now digitally available. You just type in the address and the town, and it will pull up that property and tell you if it's designated. And that's indicated by these different colors. Blue is national, green, I believe, is state, and purple is not local.
It's opposite the
HRI. Oh, I'm sorry.
yeah, the HRI are green and the purple are state.
Okay,
registered.
and blue is national.
Yeah.
But it also has all the local districts in there too. So if you don't know, and it's kind of fun to kind of, noodle around and see what the designation is. So if you click on the dot, which is associated with the address, it will also bring up a PDF of the designation form. So you can actually see, read about the district that it's part of, or if it's individually listed, you can read about why it's listed. I guess next slide. So if you want to prepare your own state register nomination or just do some history on your house, there are tons of tools. You can start locally with your local historical society or your public library, which usually has a local, local references in their reference section. Ancestry, newspapers. Connecticut State Library is extremely useful, and they're extremely helpful to help you research your property or your town. I guess that's it for that one. Next slide.
Sorry, I always wanted to say one more thing.
Oh,
I love
yeah.
these historic maps because they do have all the owners' names on them. And so you can trace it back. You know, if you find an owner's name, then you can go to Ancestry, pop that name in, and start finding out more about that person. And it's just, these maps are just such wonderful resources. And in Old Saybrook, and you just have tons of them. You have
Yeah.
a tremendous amount of them compared to a lot of other places. So I encourage you all to check them out if you're interested.
Yeah.
Okay, go to the next slide.
Okay, so are there any questions about materials or designations or the Historic Homes Tax Credit Program or anything?
You see me? Oh,
We have one here.
I never heard of a state, what is it, a state
Yeah.
historic district? I've heard of a national historic district. Is that the same of as a local, that would have a historic district commission, like I believe these folks are here?
No, the state is like is the sort of in the middle. It's basically for honor, and it is also provides a threshold to access to financial incentives like the Historic Homes Tax Credit or grants if you're a nonprofit or municipality. To tell you the truth, and Stacy, I'm going to put her on the spot because she was the state and national register coordinator in our office for a while.
Yeah.
A lot of things are on this.
Listed in Essex, Connecticut, Essex? On the state register?
There's, yes.
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
yeah. Because
The whole lot?
anything on the national register is automatically on the state register. And that is,
Oh, okay.
how many I mean, there's lots of individual properties listed on the state register.
Hmm.
How often do districts get introduced? I mean,
There are quite a few, but they
as only state, not
as
not
only state. Yep.
yeah.
So I think Essex is one of those that has a state registered district. So that's something that was done maybe in 2015, 16, or maybe even more recently. But so in many cases, state register doesn't really require owner approval in the same way that national register does. So national register, you need to have a simple majority of approval in order for the nomination to move forward, right? And go to the Park Service. The state register doesn't require that. So there have been several historic districts that have made it to the state review board. That's the body that makes the decision at the state level. And then they've been approved and they become state registered districts. So that's how that can work. And as Mary said, also, all of the local historic districts that were created prior to 2019 were also automatically listed on the state register. So the state register is a really interesting tool because for many years, a lot of things fed into it. So you had your local historic districts, you had some surveys of maybe even state-owned properties. There were some 800 state-owned properties that became listed on the state register. So there are a lot of ways to get listed on the state register. And that's very important because, as Mary said before, the state register is the threshold to start accessing funding. So that's why it's a really wonderful tool and a wonderful designation because, again, purely honorary, lots of benefits.
Yeah, no restrictions, but lots of benefits. And also local historic districts that were reviewed by our office for recommendation, but maybe didn't get passed at the local level are still on the state register. So both local districts that were where the ordinance was actually put in place, but also those where it failed, like the ballot, like it wasn't voted in, or the local legislative body did not vote it in. They're still on the state register. So there's a lot on the state register.
Mm-hmm.
You
And
can't
to
be
be-
just on state register. You have to
Sorry.
be national register, to be on the state register, or can you just have a separate area?
You can have a separate, yep, you can be just listed on the state register. So you can individually list a property or a district on the state register too.
Mary, I have a question regarding a district that is nationally registered.
Mhm.
Do the individual properties in that district also fall under the national registration, even though they're not singled out as national register?
Yes, and that is a common question. If you're part of a district, everything in the district that's listed as contributing in the nomination has
Right.
the same level of designation. That's why if a property is listed in a district and the owner wants it individually listed, we generally don't encourage that because it already has, the same level of designation. It's just not, individually, but yeah.
But with respect to, for example, demolition
Mm.
property in a national registered district, and that property is contributing, though not specifically listed in the national register, that it would still fall under that requirement that you described.
Yeah, it falls under the Protection Act and it is listed. I understand there's a little, I understand the feeling that a district is like a thing, one thing. And so everything in it isn't the same, but if you're in a district as contributed, you're listed. You can say,
Right.
my property is listed on the National Register,
Right.
even if it's in a district and not individually listed.
Perfect. Thank you for the clarification.
Sure.
So I have a question.
Mhm.
Bathroom. If I have a house that is in the district and is contributing, and I need a new roof, can that get the tax credit?
Yep. Yes, it can. The roof has to be at least $15,000. But
Wait, you said the roof has to be what?
well, you have to spend at least $15,000, as part of the program, but
That's crazy.
Done.
yeah, right. I know. I don't even want to talk about how much my roof cost. But say the roof only costs 5,000. If you also needed to paint for another 10,000 and upgrade your plumbing or electricity for another 5,000, you can bundle stuff together as long as you're spending at least 15,000. So yes, I mean, yeah, if you're in the National Register, if you're in the National Register, you're also on the State Register, and State Register is all you need to be eligible for the tax credit program. And if you're in a local district prior to 2019, you're also on the State Register. So
You just need to live there also. It needs to
yeah,
be.
it's for
Like,
owner occupied residences, but it is for residences up to 4 units. So if you own a 4-unit house and you live in one, but you rent out the rest, you can apply for the credit. And in fact, you could apply for up to 100, it's per dwelling unit. So if you had $400,000 worth of work to do on that house, you could get $120,000 in tax credits because, is that correct? 30 times 4? Yeah.
Yep, because you can
Yes.
get one for each unit. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, but it is an owner occupancy program. It's for owner occupants. So you can't use it for like a vacation house or something. Your primary residence, sorry.
I have a question about materials. I've heard that linseed oil-based paints are better for exterior work. Do you have any experience with them?
So every year,
Comments?
Marina Wisniewski
Yeah.
does a wonderful demonstration at the Spark event in Kent, which is happening this weekend, on linseed oil paints. And yes, linseed oil paints are incredibly durable. They're long lasting. They're the best option if you can get your hands on them. So we do recommend them highly. And they also have really wonderful colors. The vibrancy of the colors is pretty great. So
Recommend any brands?
I don't know of any specific brands, but if you want to exchange your information with Lynette, I'm happy to get that information to you.
Yeah, and I don't know if Marina has put her presentation into any sort of digital form, but she's a wealth. We can, between Stacy and me, we can get you more information on how linseed oil based paints work, where you would use them, and how you might find a contractor that knows how to work with them,
Yep.
and also brands. But we have to get that from Marina because she's sort of the expert on that,
Mhm.
at least in our office.
She is. No, that's who we go to too. So
Okay.
A question. How difficult is it to get onto the register as far as what sort of criteria? You said that age is not a criteria anymore. So what is the sort of things that are being looked for to get a home onto the register?
I'll let Stacy jump in too, but you start by looking at maybe who lived there, or is the property or district part of a larger pattern of development, or is it especially development in history? Or does it have very unique and high integrity architectural features? So basically, does it have any historical significance? Not just, because somebody famous lived there, but because maybe it was, part of an early 20th century development, that was also part of the larger 20th century development so it's not the obvious, like, Hamilton slept here, so, but that's where, well, actually, Stacy could help as a circuit rider, not writing the nomination, but kind of helping you suss out what it is about the property that might make it eligible. And Stacy, you could probably articulate it better because this was this is what you did for for several years.
well, I mean, Mary did hit it on the head. It's not just the architecture. So it's the integrity of the building. So it needs to retain enough integrity that the period of significance that we talk about. So say you have a Greek Revival house, right? That could be an 1850s, 18 through the 1870s house, right? Or 1880s house. That would be something that we'd want to see enough of that Greek Revival style still intact in one way or another, that the person who maybe lived in it during the period of significance would still recognize it today, right? It doesn't mean you can't have a new kitchen or new bathrooms or live in it in a modern way, but there just has to be enough of that old, of those character defining features intact to read as a specific style if you're going to list it for architecture. And then, as Mary said, it could be part of a broad pattern of development. So say it's part of say it was even a ranch that was really well designed and part of a series of ranches that were fairly untouched, that were part of a development, and they all were done at the same time. That's a pattern. It shows a pattern, and that can be something that the State Historic Preservation Office or the National Park Service would recognize. So 50 years of age is a general guideline. It's not the cutoff for the state register, but it is a guideline. But when you're talking 50 years, you're talking 1970s ranches. So it really encompasses a really broad range of resources. And we'd be happy, as Mary said, to do an initial sort of write-up to send into either Marina or Jenny for their evaluation.
Is Preservation Connecticut, how is it affiliated with the state of Connecticut, or is it just a separate organization that does a lot of preservation work?
So we're affiliated with them. The funny thing is, most of us have worked for one of the other offices at one point. So I worked there. Todd Levine, who now works at so there's that connection. But we're statutory partners. So we actually the legislature created us as a statutory partner with the SHPO, and we work together with them on a weekly basis on everything. So I talk to Mary every week, I think. It's like old,
Almost every day, yeah.
it's like old home time. for-
It's yeah, Preservation Connecticut is a statewide nonprofit.
Mhm.
Our office, although we do have a lot of financial incentives, is, you know, I hate to say it, but more regulatory. We're
Yeah.
put in place by the federal government to carry out the historic preservation programs, you know.
Mhm.
We're just fortunate to also be able to fund projects as well. Um, and
So
and
we're more advocacy. I'd say like
Yeah.
we can
and
go
education,
and
yeah.
education. So we can do things like, stand in front of a building and say, don't knock it down, right? We can do that, right?
Yeah.
Because we're an advocacy organization. We don't tend to do that, but we tend to write letters. But we can be more outspoken in advocacy on advocacy issues. And as Mary said, they have a regulatory responsibility that we don't have any hand in whatsoever. So we both just try to help people, but in very different ways, just by the nature of our organizations.
Question. With respect to the tax credit, can that be repeated frequently? If
Yes,
you're
it
having
can.
trouble?
Yes, it can. You can only have one application at a time, but just say if unfortunately you have $300,000 worth of work, if you can break it up into discrete projects, you apply for your first 100,000, do all the work, close out the tax credit, then you can turn around and apply again. So, it doesn't have to be 100,000, but I'm just saying if you have, several projects and you can break them out into discrete projects of $15,000 or more, you can definitely use it over the course as long as you need it.
Thank you.
Is there a time frame associated with that, an annual, or is it
Oh, well,
as you do the project?
you can apply anytime. You have, once your application is accepted, you have what's called a tax credit reservation, and that's good for 5 years. And so once you complete the project and pay for it, you do have to complete the project and pay for it first, then you're issued your tax credit voucher. And that's what you would use on your either state income tax form to decrease your tax liability, or sell it to a corporation that's qualified to use it. And this is all in state statute. And right now, the biggest, purchaser, for lack of a better word, of the tax credit homeowners is Eversource. And we kind of can facilitate that transaction.
I do have one more question. I don't know who came up with the idea to do this meeting, but it's been very beneficial. And was it
That was the Historic District Commission. yes.
Okay. Is that historic district commissions?
There's one Historic District Commission for the North Cove Historic District. There is, there's also a Historic District South Green, but that does not have a local historic district, so it's not regulated. Fenwick has one also.
Okay, I thought, yeah.
That's it. All right, I think that's it.
One
One
quick
more
question,
question.
is there a source for this presentation? Is there a way to, the materials?
Could we get a copy of this so we could put it on the website like we did last time?
Definitely.
That'd be
Yep.
great. Okay, so yeah, we'll post it on the website. It'll take a little bit, a couple weeks maybe, but we'll get it
Thank
up
you.
there.
When you say posted on the website, which website?
The town of Old Saybrook, so it's Old Saybrook,
Oh, okay.
ct.gov, and then if you click on Historic District Commission, it'll be there.
Okay, thank you very much.
I think that's it. Thank you, Stacy and Mary.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having us, and thanks for the virtual.
Yeah, thank you. Next time we'll come in person.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
You have a good night.
Thank you.